Thank you, Jillian. And let's see. All right. Welcome to, fall. And today we're going to be hearing on presentations from perspective of commissioners of revenue and from state tax on the local revenue picture relative to utility scale solar. And just to put in perspective what is to come, as you could see from looking at the agenda, we've got presentations to come from representatives of the solar developer groups, Dominion Energy and electric cooperatives. All of them have confirmed. We're definitely having the presentation from solar developers on October 26th. The Dominion and electric co-ops probably going to present together, but whether that happens on the 26th of October or the 16th of November, I haven't quite nailed that down yet, but and that will conclude all of our identified groups that we wanted to hear from. And at that point, then we start to put together some kind of a document for everybody to review and react to before being presented to the commission. In an ideal world, that presentation of the commission would take place at its December meeting. But as I discussed with the commission last week, just because of the magnitude of all the input we've gotten, it may not occur until our March 2023 meeting. So with that, let's go around and do some introductions. I think I've allowed, we may still have one or two more jump in. Obviously, I'm Eldon James. I'm Rappahannock River Basin Commission staff. Our presenters, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We'll start with Tommy.
Yes, this is ThomasvBlackwell. I'm the Commissioner of the Revenue in Essex County and a friend of the Rappahannock. So I grew up on the Rappahannock.
There you go. Rod.
Great, thank you. I'm Rod Compton. I'm the Director for Property Tax and Railway and Pipeline for the Department of Taxation.
Very good. Now let's just kind of work around my my screen here. John McCarthy. We'll do John. Yeah, there we go. Since I got multiple Johns here. Thank you, John McCarthy. I'm sorry I stepped on you.
No problem.
All right, let's move down the river to Stafford.
John Saunders, Environmental Programs Administrator, Stafford County.
Very good. Don.
Don McCown, Piedmont Environmental Council.
Michelle.
Hi, Michelle Edwards, Rappahannock Rapidan Regional Commission.
Good morning, Michelle. Harrison.
Hi, Harrison Preman, planner at Culpeper County Planning Department.
Deirdre.
Deirdre Clark, John Marshall Soil and Water Conservation District, serving Fauquier County.
Thank you, Deirdre. Sarah.
Sarah Holberg, planning consultant for the Alliance for the Shenandoah Valley. And hi, Sarah, other Sarah.
I know it wouldn't be a meeting if there weren't two of us at least. I'm Sarah Parmalee, Culpeper Land Use Representative for Piedmont Environmental Council.
Welcome, Sarah, and Sarah also. Let's see, Luke.
Hi, folks. I'm Luke Peters with the Berkeley Group.
Bill.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Bill Latney from Westmoreland County, and at this point, I'm not anything. Pretty much retired.
Landowner.
Well, that too.
There you go. Brian.
Good morning, Brian Johnson with Virginia Farm Bureau.
And Sam. Okay. Samuel McLaren with Culpeper County. I'll do the introduction for you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tommy and Rod. I think, Tommy, you're going to tee this up, and then Rob's going to present first. Am I correct?
That's correct. Thanks, Eldon. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. About 6 months ago, I started sitting in on the Rappahannock River Basin Commission meetings and the technical committee because I had a concern about solar facilities, especially the one I knew about in Essex County, and was concerned and wanted to hear about what some of the economic impacts are. And I've learned a lot over the last 6 months. Asked Eldon if perhaps we could share a little bit about the revenue impact of solar facilities. Of course, it impacts throughout the Commonwealth, but we are impacted significantly here in the Rappahannock River Basin. So Eldon agreed, and so I did a little research, but I realized I didn't know very much except what I had here in Essex County. And I suggested that we get the state perspective on this. And Rod Compton is the property tax manager for Virginia Department of Tax. And he's been in that position now for, I believe, a little over a year, but he came from Prince George's County as a chief assessor, real estate assessor there. And Rod has a long history in the real estate assessment world for localities. And I will also mention that he's in the pipeline to be the president of the Virginia Association of Assessing Officers here in, I believe it's a couple of years, Rod?
Couple of years, yes, a couple
Yeah,
of
a
years.
couple of years. But anyway, he's he's been very active in the real estate assessment world here in the Commonwealth and is very knowledgeable on the impact of solar facilities here in the Commonwealth. So we asked Rod if he would step in and talk to us a little bit about that today. So Rod, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Tommy. Thank you, Eldon and the group for allowing me to come before you today. I know from a valuation standpoint and local impact, the solar facilities have been a real challenge and continue to be that. And one of the main challenges that we find is just the differences in the code with regards to what is taxable and what is exempt. So I'm going to begin a presentation here now. I was fortunate enough, or we were fortunate enough to have the SEC do a presentation at our BWO seminar in the summer. They've graciously allowed us to use, which we will, many of their slides in this presentation. So as I kick off, I'll make those slides, make everyone aware as we move through the presentation. Hold on one moment. I will get my technology on my side moving forward. Okay. Now, can I share my screen? That's my next.
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay, fantastic. Again, I apologize for the technology challenge. Okay. All right. So are you seeing my screen at this moment?
No. Are you? Oh.
Here we go.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I had to do the double click. Okay, wonderful. So outstanding. So I am Rod Compton again with the Department of Taxation, and this is our presentation on solar and energy storage facilities and how the assessment process and exemption process affects localities in the Commonwealth. And let's see. Okay, fantastic. The property tax unit is a portion of the Department of Taxation, and our main function is to support localities in their valuation functions of real and personal property. So we provide advisory aid, education, training, and code oversight, especially for assessor qualifications and certifications, education for boards of assessors, boards of equalization. We determine and help with maintaining assessment levels throughout the Commonwealth. We provide studies. We do 3 main studies throughout the year. Our assessment to sales ratio study, which is critical in the education funding formula for localities. We perform the estimated ratio study at the beginning of each year, which is a critical part of public service valuation, which we'll discuss a little bit later in this presentation. And then we do a local tax survey, which is utilized statewide to determine the level of assessments and the land book values through every locality, city, town, and county throughout the Commonwealth. We also oversee land preservation tax credit appraisal compliance through our department division. We are responsible for maintaining State Land Evaluation Advisory Council and land use questions, and assisting Virginia Tech and other interested parties in developing those rates and presenting those rates. We hold an advanced assessor school every year, which includes over 200 students that have varying IAAO classes to help and maintain the professionalism of the assessment staffs throughout the Commonwealth. And we do recording tax refunds, which when deeds are recorded in the wrong courthouses throughout the Commonwealth, we provide refunds in those situations. Also, the other unit that is under property tax is railway and pipeline. So we're responsible for valuing all railroads throughout the Commonwealth, all land associated with railroads, and then all underground pipelines. We acquired that from the SEC in the 1980s. So that's the other portion of public service valuation throughout the Commonwealth is done through our department. So solar throughout the Commonwealth has been promoted. Obviously, you're all very aware of the incentive programs that are in place through the General Assembly and through the Code of Virginia, through the exemption statutes that allow developers to efficiently develop alternate sources of energy. There are some locally available options that provide incentives to encourage alternative energy sources as well. Today, we're primarily going to focus on the utility scale solar projects, which are larger and would not fall under local option, but would fall under the code that allows exemptions by right, based on the megawatt hours. So the 2 sections of code that apply in the solar instances are 58.13660 and 58.13661. 3660, like we discussed, is primarily for the utility grade solar projects, and by general law, there are exemptions in place. Local options are primarily privately owned solar facilities. Specifically, we will not be discussing that at length today. Here's one of the first slides from the SEC presentation, but they did a wonderful job on who is the assessing authority with the different megawatt size of projects. Generally, if a project is 25 megawatts or less, it's going to be valued by the locality, and it's up to the locality to determine and manage the exemptions and the taxable base. Any independent solar project that's greater than 25 megawatts, it's considered utility grade by the SEC, utility scale by the SEC, and therefore they we would assess that at the state level and provide the values to the locality. So this electric supplier portion of the code in 2658.12600 is the key by which who will actually do the valuations of the projects. And of course, the SEC has a staff that handles solar valuation. When it comes back to the locality, it then falls upon the shoulders of locality to determine those local rates. And it can be quite a project for the localities to maintain those rates. So a table of contents, which we'll cover today, is 58.13660. We'll briefly talk about exemptions and true values, how those exemptions actually affect the true values for the localities. We'll briefly go over how solar projects are assessed in the Commonwealth. And then we have some links and resources that we won't go over, but that'll be available for you to use in the future as a reference document. 58.13660 defines certified pollution control equipment and facilities, and it provides a local and state exemption of taxation through Article 10, Section 6 of the Virginia Constitution. So the General Assembly did have this passed and provided those incentives for local development of solar projects. Equipment, facilities, or devices is not specifically defined in statute, and it can apply to anything that is part or includes the solar energy system, excluding the land. So land is not included as a solar energy equipment, facility, or devices for exemption purposes, and is subject to local taxation for all projects. Another wonderful SEC slide. The applications throughout the Commonwealth as of July 1 of this year show the dispersion throughout the state on projects that are greater than 5 megawatts. And as you can see in the South Side region, there's been a tremendous impact. And as you're getting to your region of the state, it's continuing to increase year over year. So the projects have been coming online at a rapid pace, and localities have been somewhat overwhelmed in some cases on how to manage those requests for special exceptions or rezonings. So 3660 does provide a definition of what type of facility provides the exemption by right or by code. Those solar energy facilities must be owned or operated by a business that collect, generate, and transfer, store thermal electric energy, and they do not have to be certified by the Department of Taxation. So this provides latitude at for the types of developers who are creating these projects, as you've seen. In most cases, the land underneath the solar projects is privately owned, but we do have somewhat of a surge of the public utilities purchasing these larger scale projects, and we'll highlight some of that as we move forward. So the exemption for solar projects, exempt amount really depends on when the project was put into place and the size and megawatt of the project. So these revenue and additionally, revenue share was put into the code to allow localities to make the choice on whether to value these projects locally or to accept a revenue share in lieu of that valuation. And when a revenue share is adopted, then the taxable portion of the property now becomes exempt. So I'm going to just run through quickly the myriad of codes and code changes that have occurred over the last decade and how this has been put into place. And unfortunately, this is going to highlight how confusing it can be for a locality on which way to essentially slot which portion of a property or project is going to be exempt or what can be taxable. So if a project was put into place and it was 20 megawatts or less prior to 2015, it was 100% exempt. As we moved through and that changed, as projects came online, the code changed to say on or before December 31, 2018. So it increased that date. Now, there are some exceptions with regards to private colleges and public institutions that do allow for exemptions. As we again moved through the code, we saw where the larger projects that were coming online between the timing dates of January 1, 15 and June 30, 2018, then had an 80% exemption. Again, there was a change that said, okay, well, it's greater than 20 but less than 150, it had an 80% exemption. So everything over 150 was fully taxable. Then we came in and the General Assembly exempted all solar projects that were 5 megawatts or less from local taxation. And again, this is just the improvements. The land was still taxable. And then just this year, they changed back to allow the localities would phase in taxable status for projects that were 5 megawatts or less. So again, it can be a real challenge for localities to determine exactly what and when items are taxable. Currently, then we have any project that's now greater than 5 megawatts. Actually, if it was put online after July 1 of 2022, it would include all projects that are less than 150 megawatts, essentially have a phase in for taxability. So years 1 through 5, an 80% exemption, 6 through 10, 70%, and then the remaining life of 60%. This can have a tremendous impact on the taxable, the ability for the localities to collect revenue from the projects. In summary, this is a nice summary slide from the SCC. What we just went over, essentially 100% of projects 20 megawatts or less that were before 2018. And I won't read through all these, we just went over them, but this is a wonderful summary slide that essentially is providing that anything now that comes online currently that's less than 150 megawatts will provide some form of exemption to the project owner. Again, this is our less than 5 megawatt event that we saw that we did have a full exemption, and beginning this year's of July 1, that's now phased in to mirror what we have in the other megawatt size projects. One of the other challenges we see is that we have multiple parcels and multiple projects that are under certain provisions to fall under some of the megawatt limits. However, the code does provide that multiple projects with one interconnection agreement are treated as one project. So that does, excuse me, provide that ability to make sure that they are slotted properly within the exemption status. So projects with regards to revenue share, for initial interconnections made after January 1, 2019, those exemptions without revenue share provide those exemptions. Once there is a revenue share in place, however, then the project is exempt from further taxation other than the land values. So again, but very confusing portions of code that we have to continually monitor and update our statuses. And again, same process here, a summary slide for your reference for later. These exemptions, again, can be very confusing based on the date and time they came into place. The projects that are coming online now, I think we do have essentially where as we see here, we're looking at anything that's under 150 megawatts provides that exemption over the phase-in period we discussed earlier. Okay, so currently the date for exclusion is July 1, 2030. So the exemption for any of these solar farms does not apply unless the application is filed by July 1, 2030. More than likely that sunset date will be extended as we move forward to the process because of the political demands to increase the acreages or megawatts within the state. Now, a locality may elect to pass the ordinance to do a revenue share of up to $1,400 per megawatt. And again, this can apply to projects greater than 5 megawatts. And when that happens, then the 100% of the project is exempt from taxation. We'll talk about this a little bit more as we move forward, but land valuation, land is always taxable at the local level for these projects. So therefore, that is a revenue stream that is important for the locality to capture. And we'll talk about some strategies of that as we move forward. The solar projects that are 25 megawatt, or excuse me, greater than 25 megawatts, that valuation of the land will be done by the SCC. That's an important factor to discuss because the SCC does value land based on local rates. So it's important that the locality classify these projects properly and have land valuation methods in place that the SCC can adopt to accurately value the land that are underneath these projects. I'm going to go back to this slide because the SCC will value land that is owned by public utilities. However, all leased land underneath no matter how large the project is, will be valued locally unless it is owned by a public utility. Like we talked about earlier, if there's one interconnection agreement, those multiple solar projects will be included will be gauged and slotted into the exemption status based on the total of their megawatts, not their individual project megawatts. We've touched on this briefly, but again, anything greater than 5 megawatts would have to have a filing date before July 1, 2030. And then the application has to be filed with the locality, which means the applicant has filed an application for zoning confirmation for the locality or for special exception. And that has to be done again by that filing date. Another aspect of this is energy storage facilities. Energy storage facilities are defined essentially the batteries or facilities that are taking the solar energy and storing them. So the equipment facilities are devices that absorb the energy and store it for a period of time as defined in code. The same thing with the pollution control equipment that is defined in code. And those have to be certified by the Department of Taxation. The revenue shares in 58.1, 2636 provide again for those exemptions. And once you create a revenue share locally, the valuation of the solar project of the improvements would be with the revenue share in place, then the exemptions, of course, do not fall. The property is 100% exempt. Pardon me. If not, it goes through the same phases of having the exemptions phased in over 5 years, 10 years, and then the life of the project. So like we spoke about earlier, but is it valued locally or by the SCC? And this can be challenging. A project that's 25 megawatts or less and not owned by a public utility is always valued locally. And then all the land not owned by a public utility, regardless of the project size, is valued locally. The SCC is going to value all projects that are greater than 25 megawatts or owned by a public utility, regardless of the size. And then all land owned by a public utility. And again, this can be confusing at the local level on how the valuation is going to be performed, and then finally how that tax is going to be collected. So exemptions and true values. So a true value calculation is very important for localities in determining the school funding formulas. And so as we move through calculating those true values in a locality, those true values are derived from property values, taxable property values in a locality. And unfortunately, the question has arisen is how does this exemption affect true value? And unfortunately, based on state code, the exemptions that are provided in code are not included in this true value calculation. So some of the localities that have large solar footprints in the locality, unfortunately, do not get the benefit of that exempted property in the calculation for the true value, which can have an effect on their ability to pay formula and the school funding formula. All right, solar project valuation. As we move forward, many of the slides you're going to see here from this wonderful SCC presentation. So their methodology that they use can be certainly a process that can be adopted locally. They do have created manuals that they value the solar structures with, and they are very open to discussing their methodologies and methods. They've developed depreciation schedules and valuation schedules that they utilize, and certainly localities can reach out to them for assistance in the valuation process. But essentially, they're going to create a fair market value. The step the SCC takes that the locality does not take is the SCC is required to use an equalized assessed value. And what that means is that the Department of Taxation performs a ratio study. We touched on that earlier. It's our estimated sales ratio study that occurs in the beginning of each calendar year. And we're mandated at the Department of Taxation to come up with what is the assessment ratio as of January 1. For equalization purposes for public service corporation properties, the SEC must use that ratioed in determining the final market value, taxable value for the locality. So that can be a real challenge for localities that have longer reassessment cycles, more rural areas. There are, in some cases, 4 or 6 years that occur between reassessment cycles. And unfortunately, in markets like we're in today, those assessment ratios can be dramatically impacted over time. For example, we had one locality this year in the Commonwealth that their ratio for last year was around 90%. And this year, their assessment ratio was in the low 60s. So when you start taking that valuation and you're multiplying that market value by that equalization rate, it can have a tremendous impact on the locality's ability to tax. So again, just to give more detail, the development of the fair market value, the SEC is using a 35-year life depreciation table. They're creating fair market value based on original cost times that percent good factor. So they're taking the original cost and then the percentage good left over for that specific improvement. Then they're equalizing it by taking the equalization rate times that fair market value that was calculated. And then that taxable assessment is then created and given to the localities. Now, the exemptions, the SEC does calculate the exemptions for the locality, which is a tremendous help for them is when they do value the properties. So they're able to utilize those Schedule 1, 2, and Schedule 12s that they've developed to come up with those exemptions based on the code. So they will provide specific statement of what the final taxable assessed value is for those projects. Again, they've created 2 different depreciation schedules based on whether the depreciation is for the solar panels and electric equipment, or excuse me, generating equipment, or if it's the energy storage facilities. And as you can see, after we get into projects over 30 years, the rapid depreciation has come to a point where the percent good is very, very low. As a valuation example, the SEC provided an 80 megawatt facility located in New Kent, and the project's cost was $100 million. The SEC calculated the fair market value and equalization rate, which we're going to see summarized in the next page. So the SEC's tables, essentially the depreciation 90% good table, begins with new projects. And so the fair market value at $90 million. The local ratio was very strong in New Kent County at 99.8%. So the equalized assessed value came in at $89 million, $89.8 million. Now, of course, now we get into the exemptions. That pollution control exemption of 80% came in, a tremendous reduction. So the taxable amount for that year was only 20% of the equalized value. So $17.9 million on a $90 million facility. So the real property tax based on New Kent's tax rate was provided a tax revenue of $120,300. Now, comparing that to revenue share, and this is a tremendous decision that the localities must make. Do we continue to value the properties locally with regards to coming up with rates, depreciation schedules, and other challenging factors, or should we negotiate a revenue share? And in this case, it just happens that the revenue share is very close to what the taxable the ability to collect tax is. When you look at administrative costs and some of the other challenges that you'll have locally, in some cases, it's better to take a little less revenue and accept the revenue share. So some of the challenges that we see across the state in valuing solar projects. First of all, on land valuation, the land classification can be very, very challenging for localities, especially smaller localities. When you get into rezoning or special exceptions or the current use plans throughout the locality, in many cases, there won't be other commercial or industrial development. So therefore, how do you come up with certain rates? There are land use programs that have to be considered. The land use program that provides the incentive to keep land in rural and agricultural character, and of a locality has that adopted, a special exception does not automatically trigger a rollback or a removal from that program. It takes an actual change in use. So for a large scale project where the special exceptions are only coming into place, and therefore the ruling has been that rollbacks or removal from the program will not occur until there's an actual change in use. And that's typically been triggered by when a site plan is submitted. At that point in time, then the property can be removed from the land use program, and then rollback taxes and market value rates can then be used. So the valuation rates per acre are a challenge. In many localities, the agricultural rates are much lower than you would like to see for projects like this. But in many cases, there may not be industrial or commercial rates to compare them to. And then we get back into those use value rates. And so in many cases, we have localities that are struggling with providing adequate valuation rates that match what the impact of the project is. We are beginning to see more use of an income approach. The challenge can be is acquiring the lease rates either from the property owners or from adjoining localities. One of the projects we've taken on here at Tax is trying to provide that service where we can get the have a database of rates from across the Commonwealth. In many cases, that's private information, not public. So we've had to generalize the information we get, and it's been difficult to keep that in a way that we can present it to localities to utilize without releasing that taxpayer information. Same thing with terms and expenses. In most cases, these are triple net leases where there are no expenses from the property owners. And in fact, the solar developer typically is responsible for paying the taxes. So the lease that the property owner receives, typically, it goes directly to the property owner without any additional expenses. So it can be a windfall for the property owner, but it is difficult for the locality to obtain that information in many cases. And again, development of capitalization rates is an ongoing process. We've reached out to North Carolina and some of the other states that have high solar usage to try to determine what capitalization rates are. We're developing a database of capitalization rates from across the Commonwealth as well. Some of the challenges with valuing the improvements, like we talked about earlier, developing those rate schedules can be very, very difficult for a locality. Being able to utilize the resources from the SEC is certainly tremendous help. Same thing with depreciation schedules, coming up with the different schedules based on the improvement type. Developing a true schedule of economic life can be a challenge. The rate schedule, as we talked about, coming up with those fair market rate manuals that have to be updated continuously for each assessment cycle. Sometimes that'll take expert consultants to come in and help with that, or hopefully the SEC rates. And then there's revaluation schedules, like we talked about earlier. The rates can change dramatically year over year, especially when those assessment cycles are longer. Again, many cases in the Commonwealth, those timeframes for revalidation can be 4 to 6 years. And then those assessment ratios and equalization rates can have a tremendous impact on the taxable value of these larger projects that are valued by the SEC. The lower those ratios, unfortunately, the larger impact it can have on the locality's ability to actually tax these projects. Pardon me. Administration challenges we see, of course, of the oversight and enforcement challenges of the projects, the proper conditions, maintaining those mandated buffers, the decommission plans that are in place, and how the oversight of those. Trying to administratively maintain parcels and owners. You have many projects where there's multiple parcels, in some cases multiple owners. The solar project owner, in many cases, obviously is not the public utility. So those solar project developers can be difficult to maintain. And then, as we discussed earlier, use value and how that applies to these owners can be a challenge for the localities. the rates and revenue share, like we discussed, the valuation and depreciation, keeping those rates maintained can be an administrative nightmare in some cases. And then oversight of those statutory changes that tend to occur almost annually at the General Assembly can be challenging. Okay, so links and resources we've included for your reference. This is a wonderful tool from that the SEC provided us that was developed by Weldon Cooper to help localities decide which model works best for them, whether to try to do a revenue share versus trying to do the valuation modeling. A wonderful tool. The Solar Energy Industry Association has a wonderful projects list. To get the full access, this does require a membership. They do have some free tools as well that are really wonderful to use. Again, Weldon Cooper continuously has a wonderful survey that they put out, and it's a great tool to review what's going on in Virginia and compare the localities' performance to other localities. Virginia Energy, again, has a wonderful tool online and information to help support solar energy projects. I've included the contact information for the SEC that they had in their slide presentation, which again, very helpful team, and their land team, Ethan Robertson, is the utility appraiser on the land side. They value land and localities of these large owned by the utilities, and they're going to utilize those local rates. So they're going to be reaching out to each locality. And then Todd Andrews and Jason Holloway. Jason Holloway is actually the main principal in charge of the solar evaluation for the SEC. It was a great contact. And then our property tax division, of course, you can reach out to me at any time. Our property tax unit has David C. and Cindy Mabe and Lori Diastra. And then our railway pipeline team of Phil Daffron, Jung Pack, and Lisa Nelson can certainly answer any of those questions that may arise. So with that, that's all that I had today. And I thank you very much. And I'm certainly available for any questions you may have.
Rod, thank you. You said this is confusing, I think at least a half a dozen times, and I'll still say that's an understatement. What we're going to do is let Tommy talk from the commissioner's perspective, and then we'll open it up to questions. So, Tommy.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try to get my see if I can share one screen. I hope you'll be able to read this. I tried to pare it down a little bit. I'm assuming it's visible. Is that correct?
It is visible, but it is kind of small.
Yeah. And if I don't know if I can blow it up.
There
Yeah.
you go.
I'll just have to scroll across. There were 16 localities in the Rappahannock River Basin Commission that I surveyed to get information about their solar facilities. And it was a little difficult. It was a difficult time of year. I didn't get everything in yet, so I'll continue to work on it. But what I decided to do was just zero in on Essex County and to maybe give you a flavor of what it was like just to go through, just to deal with one solar facility in Essex County. We had a 174 acres under lease. It was actually 5 separate parcels and with 2 landowners. And a company out of Charlottesville which was really headquartered out in California, Coronal Development, was the facility, solar facility owner, and came in and did the work. This work was done prior to 2018. Therefore, it was 100% exempt because it was at that 20 megawatt limit. And it was purposely designed to be a 20 megawatt limit so that it would be 100% exempt from taxation. That means all of the machinery, what we call the machinery and tools, all the panels, all the transformers, all the equipment that goes with that solar facility. And of course, in Essex, it was pitched, it was developed because it was a location that was very close to a Dominion substation. And so that was one of the drivers, was to get this solar facility located there. So as you see on the chart, it's a 20 megawatt facility. It's 100% exempt. Because our connection date, and I've pared this slide down a little bit so it's not showing, but because our connection date was so early, we were, I think, the 7th solar facility in Virginia that was approved. So we were sort of a guinea pig. Because of that, we're not eligible for the revenue share. So we have approximately, and I can state this because this way it was reported in the newspaper, a $30 million original cost for our solar facility, all the equipment. And so if we could tax it at 100% in Essex County and using our depreciation table, we would generate approximately $250,000 a year in tax revenue on the actual solar facility. This is just the equipment, not the land. But we don't get any of that. So that's $250,000 we don't get. Because we're not eligible for the revenue share, if we had a 20 megawatt facility at $1,400 a megawatt, that would have been $28,000. For a locality the size of Essex County, that would be nothing to sneeze at, but we don't get that either. So we get absolutely nothing on the equipment. Now that has changed for many localities, and when this table is completed with all the other sites, all the other jurisdictions, we'll find that some are taxable, some are using revenue share, some are not. And some of my colleagues are going to have be involved in that decision-making with their governing bodies as to determine what is the maximum revenue that the locality can get. So I've just touched on the fact that we get nothing from the actual solar panels. Another little interesting fact that if this were a 25 megawatt or greater than 25 megawatt facility, it would be taxed by it would be assessed by the State Corporation Commission, and we would receive something through our public service taxation that occurs every year. The State Corporation Commission would be assessing all of the equipment and using the real estate rate, whereas we would use at the local level a machinery and tools rate, which is just something that I think is a little ironic. It's just another wrinkle in how the locality's revenue is impacted based on basically what the General Assembly has decided will happen. So I'm going to scroll over a little bit and show you what we can get from this solar facility. I've listed the 5 parcels. One parcel was owned by a tax excuse me, a nonprofit organization, and they wanted to lease 70 acres to the solar company as a revenue to increase their revenue for scholarships, which is very noble. Again, I went to the two property owners and asked if they would share their leases with me as long as I promised to keep them confidential. And I have, and I will. But based on the ground rent that they were receiving, and then with discussions with property assessors in the Commonwealth, we came up with a capitalization rate to determine what the fair market value of the land actually under lease should be. So that's how it's taxed. Again, I was trying to get this screen get this table on one screen. So I took out my calculations. I'm not showing my work here, but the bottom line is the total increase in valuation annually is just about $10,500 for all 174 acres. And that's based on the fact that 174 acres is now taxed as if it's commercial land, and it was being taxed as agriculture or forest land, and it was in the land use program. So this is basically the difference of what the property owner is paying. And of course, the property owner, I think I can share that in the lease agreement, the solar company is paying any increase that they have in tax. So it's a true profit to the property owner, whatever they're getting per acre. And that is, there's an inflation factor built into that. So it will go up at least every 5 years, according to their lease. And, and of course, the property value will go up. But consequently, the solar company will continue to pay that increase. So it's still a good deal for the property owner. It does have an impact on the folks around the solar facility. I will tell you a little story that one property owner was very happy to lease his land, but he is a farmer and he leased other land nearby that a solar company was looking to put a facility on. And he was very much opposed to that because he would have lost the farming rights to that property. Because of, in Essex County, we had somewhat of a black eye due to runoff that occurred shortly after the facility opened. And unfortunately, it made the papers, it made the evening news, all of that. And I would suggest that it's unlikely that Essex County will approve another solar facility unless it's a very small one. I don't think they will do one of this scale anytime soon. I may be wrong, but unless knowing that we don't get very much revenue from it. And lastly, I wanted to just mention that I talked to the head of our volunteer fire department yesterday. We had 3 fires at this facility that have caused a tremendous amount of expense to deal with those fires by the volunteer fire department. And I said, how much donation or some sort of payment in lieu of taxes or anything has the fire department received from the solar company? And he said, to his knowledge, 0. So we fought 3 fires out there, spent a lot of resources, and the locality is getting additional revenue of about $10,500 a year. And so we would probably say, from a revenue standpoint, this solar facility is not a very good deal. It did create jobs in the beginning, but right now there's nobody out there other than occasional maintenance and somebody to come and examine the equipment. It turns out that the solar company had sold to another company who's taken over the management of it. And they had somebody out there the day that the last fire came up, and we had 50-mile-per-hour winds gusting, and many places surrounding one historic home and a riverfront community were in jeopardy that day because of the way that fire could have spread. And many thanks to the Essex County, Rappahannock Essex County Volunteer Fire Department and surrounding counties who came in to help put out that fire and many others. I just want to say that I'm not against solar facilities, but in Essex County, it certainly has not provided very much revenue. The General Assembly has tried to remedy that to a certain degree. But when I think about these 5 parcels here that I've dealt with and 2 landowners and the amount of time I've spent on it, on one facility, I just read that Charlotte County is going to open up Virginia's largest facility. I think it was in the Virginia Business Magazine, if anybody gets that, but it's 1,000, I think it was 1,000 parcels. And it's going to be a tremendous amount of work. And of course, Charlotte County has made a decision to go ahead and do this. And several other counties down in Southside seem to be where a lot of these facilities are going. Obviously, in the Rappahannock River Basin, Spotsylvania has the largest. And I didn't have any data to share on Spotsylvania at this time. Perhaps, Eldon, I will get this table completed, and it will be a resource that we'll have in the future. That's all that I have, unless you have some questions for me. I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of one locality, my locality.
Thank you, Tommy. Okay. The chat box has been going all over the place. So I'm going to open it up for questions and or comments.
Rod, this is John McCarthy. I'm with Piedmont Environmental Council, but previously I was county administrator in Rappahannock, and one of the things that we were always struggling with was the LCI, as of course all local communities are. And someone's already referenced Charlotte County, which is obviously, in terms of if it is actually built out at its full amount, is a huge increase of conversion of acreage from agricultural to whatever it's going to get reclassified as. Has there been any analysis of the impact on LCI on any of the bigger projects in Virginia for any of the localities involved? Tom just mentioned Spotsylvania, which obviously at 6,000 acres is substantial. But I'm also thinking of Charlotte, which, and actually Charlotte is thinking now too of some of these unintended consequences. And I just wonder if you have any comment about that, or if there's been any analysis by your office.
Thank you, John. At this stage, there's not been, to my knowledge, any analysis of that at this point. We're still in our infancy stages of reviewing this, and as you know, those LCI calculations tend to lag behind a couple of years. We're using the 2019 data, I believe, for the most current projections. So certainly, as we move forward, that's something that's going to have a major impact on localities, and again, negative impact in some cases. That can be difficult to measure. So that's certainly a tool that I think needs to be brought forward, whether it's the Department of Taxation or another agency. Certainly that needs to be reviewed. I would agree.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? All right. Well, while others are waiting, Rod, you made a comment that I'd like you to expand on just a little bit. You said, based on administrative cost, it can be better to do revenue sharing and get a little less money. And I'm paraphrasing what I heard you say. Can you expand on that just a little bit?
Sure, and that certainly would be very locality specific.
Okay.
But in many cases, you've seen that myriad of different exemptions that apply. The example that was given showed New Kent County that at the initial stages of that project, there was an 80% exemption. So based on the 20% taxable status of that project, the revenue share and the ability to collect tax was very close. It was, in fact, within a percentage point or two, a couple of percentage points. And when you look at the administrative cost of having to do the valuation and maintain those tables, in some cases, it makes sense to do a revenue share. Of course, that's going to be very locality specific. Now, of course, the flip side of that, which is not discussed, is something we've just brought up here, is that once you do that, then this project becomes fully exempt. So you're collecting a revenue share, but the taxable status that would go on your land book or your taxable book, which is part of that calculation for the LCI, would now be, that project would now be have an exempt status and not be included in that overall true value.
Okay, so let me take that just a little farther.
Sure.
So if you negotiate that revenue share at the way you had shown it, the $1,400 per megawatt, and you collect 112,000 a year versus the 120 at initial, over time, as that assessed value goes up, your delta is just growing.
Right.
Because that 14 is static.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. All right.
You have to do that valuation, and that spreadsheet tool that I believe they have does include the time value of money analysis to work your way back to see how that impact converts to current dollars.
Tommy, did you have a different perspective?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Rod. My understanding is there's a 5% inflation built into that revenue share that every 5 years.
Okay.
I think it goes up.
So
It's not a
effectively
tremendous
1% a
amount.
year.
Right.
What's that? Yeah, about 1% a year. So a locality really needs to look over the life cycle of that project and say, okay, I'm going to get this much if I just do the revenue share, and then I don't have any administrative worries. I just agree to it, or have to constantly calculate, how much we're going to tax and all that. So that some of my colleagues say it's just easier to, they recommend, my commissioner colleagues will recommend to their locality, just go with the revenue share. But it's something you have to look at, and it's, which one do you choose?
And I think it's important as a group of counterparts to make sure that we're assisting these localities in some of that analysis, because in some cases, that's such a difficult choice to make that Tommy's right. In some cases, the commissioner might not want to take on those administrative responsibilities in some cases, especially if they don't have the resources in place to help manage it. But it may not be long-term the best choice for the locality. So hopefully there's a way that we can, assist in that decision-making process.
Okay. So Rod, you guys can help the local commissioners and boards when they're making these decisions and doing this analysis?
Right. Our main function of the property tax unit is to assist localities. That's our main function code and what we're here for. We may not always know the exact answer, but hopefully we can find the resources to assist each locality.
Okay. Let's see. Anybody else got a question or a comment at this point? I don't want to dominate the questioning. I do have one more though. And this is for both Tommy and Rod. What happens is, let's say you get 10 years down the road and the solar project developer, owner, not the landowner, decides, oh, we're going to change out panels. do they have to come back to the locality and advise them that they're doing that? Because that effectively is upgrading the machinery and tools.
That's exactly, they should. And I'll just jump in. All businesses that have business property have to report that to the locality, to my office every year. Early in the year, we send out those forms, and every business has to update their asset list. So if they're improving or replacing equipment, whatever, even though it's exempt, I still track it. And so I would hope every locality in the Commonwealth is doing that. All of my colleagues, even though something is exempt, don't just assume that it's static, that you need to keep track of what's going on.
Well, it seems to me if I'm an owner of a project and I'm changing out panels, depending on the structure of the project, it's not fully exempt. I mean, we just went through some examples. So if those new panels are, worth quite a bit more than the decreasing value of the older ones,
right,
it would seem that unless I've made a revenue share agreement with the locality, I've got some additional tax exposure.
In most of the localities, that would be true, wouldn't that be? I would think, Rod.
Yes, Tommy, that would definitely be true.
In Essex, it wouldn't be.
Right.
100%, but you're right. You're right. And it's definitely going to add to the administrative cost of trying to keep up with all of that.
It does.
Smaller localities don't have the staff and sometimes don't have as sophisticated revenue software. And I speak from experience on that. We may have, in Essex County, we upgraded and now we have a very nice brand new Chevy, but many have Cadillacs and can do things that we can't do. So even though we've updated, we don't have what I would call the best.
Well, I'm glad you don't have a Yugo.
Right.
All right. Other questions or comments? Okay. This is been very informative, Rod and Tommy. Tommy, as you finish your spreadsheet, which I hope you're going to be able to do,
I do too.
We will. I know it depends on the willingness of others to contribute.
I'll twist their arms. Don't worry.
Good. We will, Rod, if you can share that slide deck, we'll post it on our website for the meeting afterwards, along with this recording, so folks can have it. Thanks, John McCarthy. Yeah. Speaking of administrative expense,
one thing I did hear from Rappahannock County, and Mary told me there were no solar facilities there. So I pass that on for John.
Okay. Let's see, going forward at this point, it was interesting while y'all were presenting, I was getting some emails from Scott Foster with Gentry Lock. Scott will be presenting to us on the 26th on behalf of solar developers, but he's going to be joined by Michael Volpe with Open Road Renewables. So we'll have an attorney who represents a number of solar developers and one particular solar developer giving that presentation. So I just wanted to pass that along to everybody. And as we go forward and try to start putting pen to paper in summarizing what we've done over the course of this year, Rod, we're definitely going to have to, whatever we write about this, definitely going to have to run it by you, because there was a couple points where you lost me in some of the explanations, because it is complicated, and doggone it, we're going to get it written, and then the 2023 General Assembly will probably change it again at the rate we're going. So
every year.
It has, yeah, it really has been every year. And I'll just say this, I was told within the last week that there will likely be legislation on this topic. And it may not be favorable to localities, is the way it was put to me. So we'll be keeping our eyes and ears open there. With that, any other comments? And I'm going to give everybody back about 49 minutes of their morning. Okay. Thank you, everybody. October 26th, we may have a full 2 hours with 3 different presentations, even though the Dominion and the electric co-ops are going to, there'll be different presentations, but they're going to be to some degree blended is my understanding, because they're working together. So thank you very, very much, Rod. Really appreciate your time. And Tommy, thanks for ramrodding this.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.